Okay, so folks, thank you very much for joining us for this evening's tasting of the, I suppose, premium whiskies of Midleton Distillery. For those of you who haven't done one of these before, my name is Darren Mara. I'm the manager at Celtic Whisky Shop on Dawson Street, and I'm delighted this evening to be joined by Ger Garland. Ger, no stranger to, I suppose, these tastings. I'm sure everyone kind of here probably knows a bit about you, but would you like to maybe introduce yourself to those of you who may be meeting you for the first time?
Hi everyone, and thanks a million for popping on tonight. I don't think it was very hard to make that decision based on the lineup that we're going to taste tonight. And myself, I've been in the drink industry, particularly the whiskey business, for just over 2 decades now, which is hard to believe, because I'm so young. And I've been in, the specifically this role that I'm in now, where I'm whiskey ambassador. And I also manage all of the other whiskey ambassadors that work for Irish Distillers in the Irish market. So Jameson, Powers, the other prestige whiskies. And basically, I've been in this end of things for about a decade. And I've seen, when I started, there was nothing like the landscape or the number of people that were interested in Irish whiskey, and it has just continued to grow and grow. And excitingly, it's huge amount of new distilleries, and it looks like the future is very bright. So my point of view, I'm very much going to continue to have a job, I think, which is really great. But also, I think it's really exciting for everybody here, whether you're a beginner to whiskey or you are someone who has been into whiskey for a long time. And please ask any questions that you have via the chat. And Luke will, sorry, not Luke, Darren. Luke's ghost is still here, Darren.
Yeah.
So Darren will field them to me, or I might see them myself there. And really, no question is too silly. Or there's probably half the other people there want to know the answer. So it'll make the experience more rich for all of us if you do ask questions. So looking forward to interacting with you all.
Absolutely. And as well as that, it's questions, guys, any kind of tasting notes or thoughts on any of the whiskies that you have, do throw them in there and I'll kind of relay them on to Ger. So it's 4 whiskies this evening, and usually I'd say with 4, we're probably going to take maybe, I'd say, an hour and 15 plus or minus 15 minutes. I'd usually kind of, listen, to be honest, I'd say we're going to be closer to the hour and a half. So plenty of water, all that. Regarding the order that you want to tackle them in, Ger, we discussed this beforehand. So I'm going to put it into the chat, but if you want to have a look there, we're going to start with Redbreast.
Yes.
We'll move on to Crcokett.
Yes.
We'll then do the Power 16, and then finally it'll be the Jameson Bow Street. Just probably best to end on a cask strength, although it might make the rest of the tasting looser if we started on it.
That's true, but you wouldn't be able to probably enjoy the subtleties and nuances of the whiskies that you're tasting before.
That is true.
Even though we're finishing on a cask strength, it is actually probably the most drinkable. I don't mean the most drinkable, but it's really, really easy to drink, surprisingly, for such a high ABV whiskey. But the reason we're starting on the Redbreast 21 is simply we're going from intensity, and we're starting off the less intense whiskies. So Redbreast 21, even though it is not hugely complex, it's wonderfully delicious and is a very well balanced and put together whiskey. And then we're going to move on to the Crcokett Legacy, and that has a little bit of, it has some virgin oak influence in it. So you've got more spiciness and more of that, I suppose, American oak influence, and it just adds to more intensity on the palate. And then the Powers is more spirit forward, honeyed and spiced apple, and it is a beautiful single cask. And then we're going to finish on the Jameson 18-year-old Bow Street, which is just I think a whiskey that people are coming around to now and realizing what an amazing whiskey it is. And the lads who work in the Celtic Whisky Shop have been the people that have been telling me that why are you or Irish Distillers not making more noise about this whiskey? And I think the real reason is, unfortunately, it was launched just before all of this kicked off, and we had a big plan to do loads of stuff about it, and we weren't able to do it. So you will see more activity around Jameson 18, particularly at Whiskey Live this year, hopefully, in June. So you will definitely see stuff around it then.
Absolutely. I suppose I was very excited to do this tasting because, and I've mentioned this in a few previous, but I started my whiskey career working in Bow Street for Jameson. And I actually started I think it was the week that Bow Street 18 got released. So I remember getting to try it before it went on general sale. So I've had a bottle of it that I just finished off just after Christmas. And I was saying to you, Ger, I've had a chance to taste that whiskey kind of at every level of my whiskey kind of career, being
Yes.
complete novice to being kind of intermediate. And now I'm not by no means, I'd say I'm still intermediate, but better knowledge, better palate, and just kind of charting the evolution from my palate as well has been fantastic. So guys, yeah, what we'll do is we'll kick off. I have already poured my Redbreast 21, and if you haven't done so, I'd say we'll get that done. Redbreast 21,
Yes.
Ger. Um,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Darren.
I was just gonna say, when I first started, I'd say this is the whiskey that I first properly, truly loved. In that, it was the one that I always felt I got the most out of, and I suppose I'd say I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of people, this is one of their favorites.
It was Irish Whiskey of the Year in 2015 and 2016, 2 years in a row. No other Irish whiskey has done that at the Irish Whiskey Awards. And those awards, which are organized, happen to be organized by um, the Celtic Whiskey organization, or the group, basically is probably the most respected and valued awards that by the team in Midleton, simply because they are totally anonymous. So and they are basically judged by the people who drink whiskey. So there's various different groups. There's like the Aviators Whiskey Society, the Irish Whiskey Society, the Cork Whiskey Society, Kilkenny Whiskey Guild, and the majority of them are made up with whiskey enthusiasts. So they are blind tastings. They're all is basically the category that it is, and then the highest scoring whiskey out of all the different categories ends up being Irish Whiskey of the Year. And Redbreast 21 won it in 2015, 2016, and I think it would have probably won 2017 if people hadn't. It's so distinct on the nose. It was first launched at Whiskey Live in 2012, so we're at the 2011. It was Whiskey Live in 2011. So we've just passed the 1 year birthday of 10-year birthday of Redbreast 21, and it is a 46% non-chill filtered 21 to 28-year-old whiskey. So it's quite an extensive age range, and so we might as well kick into it because we're here for a whiskey tasting. So if you haven't tasted whiskey before, what I'd recommend you do is you first look at the whiskey, and you'll notice it has a nice, rich golden color. It's like I wouldn't say there's a ruby hue off it, but it's a rich golden color. So like almost like a treacly type of color. And when we look at it in the glass, you can really see the viscosity, the legs, coming down off it, and this gives us an indication of the mouthfeel. It is basically a whiskey that has a large contribution of this style of whiskey that we call a trad pot, or traditional pot still, which when aged in barrels, the batches, some of the earlier batches of this, are for the first couple of years, all contained whiskey going back as far as 1984, so it was quite old. So the age range is 21 to 28 years. So if we go back 28 years, what are we looking at? 1980, 88 or thereabouts, you probably have whiskey in here, if I'm not mistaken. Is it go back 28 years? So what would it be? 1990, 1998, 90, that sort of area, whereas the original batches would have been the decade before. It is a whiskey that's very complex as well. So we'll have a little nose of it. And it just has that, I don't know what that distinct Redbreast character is that contribution of the Spanish oak. It's not necessarily rich red berries. It's more tropical. There's more of a tropical fruit note to it. There's hints of plum and peach and that type of delicate, soft, fleshy stone fruits. And really, when you get that on the palate, which we're going to just try now, and before you do, if this is your first whiskey of the evening, have a little sip of water, and that's just to moisten your palate. Your throat might be a little bit dry, and it just will make it a bit easier. Or you can just jump straight in. So we're going to jump straight in. Let's have a little sip.
Here's everyone.
Initially, you get a bit of that pot still spice in the tip of your tongue, and you get that viscosity I was talking about, that creaminess in the middle of your palate, and that fruit just pops in the middle of the palate. It's an absolutely wonderful whiskey, really well balanced, lovely balance between the spice from the wood at the back of the palate and the spirit at the front of the palate. And it's rich, it's succulent, it is got great length to it. It's moresome as well, which means you have another sip.
It's one of those whiskeys that I said, it's kind of the first whiskey that I ever truly loved, and I've always made sure that I have at least one bottle of it kind of on the home bar. In terms of, you know, Redbreast, it's obviously a very kind of heavily sherried whiskey. You know, and it's not, you know, oftentimes you can hear people talk about a finish, but it's entire maturation. It's a mixture. It's a marriage of bourbon casks and sherry casks.
Yes.
Do you, I suppose, as much as you can disclose, like, would you have any idea kind of what ratios you'd be looking at? Would you be looking at maybe more bourbon, more sherry, or is it close to even?
In Redbreast 21-year-old, it's actually quite even. In something like 12-year-old, it's, say, they don't talk about percentages, but if you imagine a third of the number of the casks are European oak, and and 2/3 are American oak. But then again, the European oak is a 500-liter sherry butt, and the American oak is a 200-liter ASB, so American Standard ex-bourbon barrel. So that's, you know, it's almost a way of describing it without actually saying what the proportion is. But in my mind, I think it is the influence of the wood is more the important thing than the volume ratio. So the European oak tends to contribute a lot more character to the whiskey. If you imagine the American oak being like a really good stable base to the whiskey, and the European oak is bringing all of those stone fruits and complementing, I suppose, the vanilla and toasted wood notes that you get from the American oak, which we'll talk about more in the Midleton Barry Crcokett when we get to that. But basically, the European oak, when you age the whiskey for longer periods, like 21 to 28 years, the other thing to say to you as well, Darren, is that we're using first fill bourbon, first fill sherry, second fill bourbon, second fill sherry, third fill bourbon and third fill sherry, fourth fill bourbon and fourth fill sherry. So the more times that you use a barrel in that mix, the less of an influence that you actually get from the wood. So obviously the first fills are going to impact a lot more impact from the wood character, the compounds within the wood. Whereas when you get to the fourth fill, you can imagine there's much more of a spirit influence. But you have to also remember, these whiskies are all the whiskies in this whiskey that we've tried are 21 to 28 years. So again, you're going to get this mellowing out of the whiskey, or rounding of the whiskey over long periods of time as the whiskey, you know, essentially reduces, reacts, and evaporates out of the barrel. So, you know, all of those different processes are happening, and you get this concentration of flavor. So you get this elegant but fruity, luscious, delicious whiskey. I think it's great value. I know it's nearly €200 a bottle, but it's really, really good value from the point of view of what you're getting in here. This is a really outstanding whiskey.
Absolutely, and like I definitely agree in terms of value for money. It's kind of hard to be. You know, I suppose, without sounding like I'm disparaging other places, like there can be quite young whiskies that can come out at a very high price point, and you know, in a way, I feel like they're not necessarily made for drinking; they're made for putting on a shelf, and you know, 10 years down the line, maybe it's a collector's piece. But Redbreast 21, I feel, although it's maybe a rarer whiskey, and we can get into that a little bit more, it is very much one I'd say open it, enjoy it. I think you know, the tropical fruit flavor is something that I've always gotten from it, almost like a little bit of kind of that maybe apricot, a little bit of mango. And it's almost like it's a nice change compared to say 15, which for me, you know, has more kind of maybe bitter, dark chocolate, slight oakiness. And then your 12, which is more kind of the traditional dried fruits, the Christmas cake flavors. I suppose the barrel combinations on these, I said, you're using first fills all the way up to fourth fills.
Yes.
You know, how much kind of trial and error goes on in that? You know, how do you decide, okay, actually we need to use some fourth fills on this to maybe balance it out?
So this whiskey came about, see, because it's 28 years of age, you know, you can imagine these whiskies were laid down by Barry Crcokett and Brendan Monks, would have been our head of maturation or head of wood management in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And basically, you would have had, I suppose, their foresight laying these down. And you're talking about experimentation, but where I'm going with this is that when they did the refurbishment, or essentially when Irish Distillers was formed in 1966 as United Distillers, in 1967 became Irish Distillers. But basically, the whole idea of the three companies coming together, Jameson, Powers, and the Cork Distilleries Company, was essentially to modernize and pool the resources. And part of that was they immediately set about trying to look at the process. And the process is that what they call how they make whiskey. So they call that the process. And part of that is maturation is one big lump. You know, distilling is essentially chemical engineering. It's an exact science. There isn't, oh, we've had a happy accident, here's a wonderful thing. Whereas wood management, wood maturation is a less exact science. But if you're, I suppose that's Kevin O'Gorman, our former head of maturation and our master distiller now, would say, you know, if all your inputs are of a high enough or of the highest quality, your outputs will be the highest quality. So the decision was made not to compromise on wood. So Brendan Monks essentially had to go out into the world, build relationships with sherry producers, wine producers, you know, to go over to the States and kind of tighten up the supply of bourbon barrels, all of that sort of stuff. Because if Celtic had been in business in the 50s and 60s, like Mitchell's were, they actually got cognac in barrels delivered to them. You know, they got sherry delivered to them in barrels and they bottled it in their own cellars. So it meant basically from the late 50s, early 60s onwards, those barrels stopped coming into Ireland because everything started coming in bottles then. So they really had to start from zero. And it's really good that we're going to try Midleton Barry Crcokett as well, because there's virgin American oak in here. And part of that experimentation that Brendan Monks and the team would have worked at in Midleton when they moved into the distillery there in this, you know, they were even doing it before that. Clement Ryan in John's Lane and Barry Crcokett trained in John's Lane. They were experimenting with these barrels that Brendan was going around sourcing all over the place. And where I'm getting at is basically there was a lot of experimentation, but it happened over decades, and then you only see the fruit in 2011. You know, like it's kind of really hard to get your head around. Like part of that experimentation was with the virgin American oak was Marconi, Jameson. And, you know, we were seeing a decade after they experimented with it, or no, more than a decade after they had done experimentation with the virgin oak cask, you're seeing the result of it in something like Marconi. And now it's in Midleton very rare. You know, it's used in, you know, Jameson Gold, for example, was a whiskey that used to have virgin American oak. And then, you know, the casks, you think of something like, you know, Red Spot. People are like, oh, why don't you just make more Red Spot? But the problem is that the casks, the Marsala casks in Red Spot are 16 years old as the youngest ones, you know. So we only laid down a little bit 16 years ago. So all that experimentation takes actually quite a long time to happen. It's pretty easy. It's not easy, but it's a lot more simplistic to get a wine cask and put something into it and then finish it for 6, 12, 14, 24 months. Because it's at the end of production, but it's actually, you'll notice with many of our whiskies, there's full maturation. So it's full maturation in that cask. It's not a finish. So it's both. We've done both, but in the past, I suppose something like Redbreast 21-year-old, it was the foresight that they would lay down the stuff knowing it would go into something. And if they hadn't done that, we didn't have any products 30 years before they came up with Redbreast 21-year-old that would needed a fort fill sherry butt, So that's it's a very long-winded way of basically saying it takes decades to affect change rather than years. It's very hard to do something in a short period of time in whiskey.
I fully get that, and I suppose the full maturation, the way I always describe it is full maturation is like seasoning food before you've cooked it, whereas a finish is like seasoning it after you've cooked it. Like you're kind of adding on top of rather than ingraining within it. Guys, if you have any questions or comments for Ger, or if you have any taste notes, please do throw them into the chat. I suppose just before we finish up on Redbreast 21, the sherry cask is such an integral part of it, and it's Antonio Paez Lobato cooperage who Midleton deals with, isn't it? Am I right in saying the casks are specifically commissioned by Midleton?
Well, we actually source the oak in the forests of Galicia. It is that so it is that attention to detail. I would call it OCD more than that's that insurance that so we work with sawmills in Madabar sawmills in Barria in the north of sorry, they're not the north of Portugal. They're the south of Galicia, but it's in the northwest of Spain. So if you look at Portugal, on the top bit above it is a province called Galicia, and it's basically the forests are on the border with Portugal. So the Portuguese oak we get is actually just a couple of miles or kilometers south, but it's on the Portuguese side of the border, and they go to Porto to be made into barrels, whereas the sawmills in Barria, we've been dealing with them for 3 generations, and they go into the forest, they source the oak for us. The oak is quarter sawn into rough staves and excuse me, quarter sawn into rough staves, sent then on lorries essentially down to Cadiz province, which is way down the south of Spain. You get a totally different temperature, a lot warmer, like can be 30 degrees in September. It's a really warm place. And then Jerez de la Frontera, which is just 30, 40 kilometers inland from Cadiz, you have Jerez, where sherry comes from. And sherry itself is actually an anglicization of Jerez. So what happened was the English originally called it sherry sack because they stole it from Cadiz in a big raid or a conquest. And that's how I suppose these islands got a taste for it. But traditionally, those casks would have been transportation casks. So sherry itself is actually mainly aged in American oak. They don't really use European oak at all. So what we call sherry casks traditionally would have been the transportation casks that were discarded after they were emptied when they were delivered to Dublin. And Brenda Monks or other people would have gone out and tried to build relationships. And one of those places we built a relationship with was the Paez Lobato cooperage in Jerez de Frontera. And we're working with the 3rd generation of the family now, Isaac and Esperanza. And Esperanza worked in Midleton as a tour guide herself for nearly 4 years while in university in Cork. And now she runs the business, and her grandfather, Don Antonio, is the one that set it up, and she took over from her mother. So, it's amazing. And we're dealing with the 3rd generation of the sawmill as well. So yeah, it really is like a family type relationship.
That's lovely. It's almost like in the Middle Ages when a king would send their son to fight for the army of a neighboring kingdom. It's like, yeah, go over there and serve with Midleton. Martin Fay just asked there, any idea when this comes back into stock? I do, Martin, and the answer probably won't make you happy. Yeah. So I suppose it's its own success. Like Redbreast 21, such a fantastic whiskey. We're looking at another couple of months before this will be readily available again. Am I allowed to give the exact month, Ger?
Well, it's been bottled, as far as I know, it's been bottled either in May or June, but it probably won't be on the shelves till July. And it could even be later, unfortunately, just simply we're having the same, look, what's happened is Redbreast has absolutely exploded in Ireland in particular. So in every market, it's growing really, really fast. But in Ireland, it grew crazy last year. And in the past, most of that growth was driven by Redbreast 12-year-old, but now it's growing across the whole range. So products that we wouldn't have sold a huge amount previously, now people are really going for. And that's the problem is that whiskey takes time to make. So we only have a certain amount coming up that will be mature and ready to be part of Redbreast 21. We also have the same problem with Redbreast 15-year-old as well. And it is simply because it has become so popular. It's no other reason than that. We're actually making more of it than we've ever made. But unfortunately, demand is many, many multiples of what we can supply at the moment. So it will be, just because we don't have any in stock at the moment doesn't mean that it mightn't be available in other markets, or, you know, and Celtic, I'm sure, you know, they will try and source it. If they can't get it from us, they'll try and source it somewhere else. But unfortunately, Darren is right. It could be another 4 months probably before it's available again.
Oh yeah, and like we actually managed to get some of, I think it was the 2011 bottlings of Redbreast 21 from foreign markets and bring them back in. So where there's a will, there's a way. Jason has a question there, and I think possibly as we maybe get into the next whiskey, which is Barry Crcokett, it's maybe a good way to kind of tackle Jason's question. But it's what's the best way to drink whiskey to get the best from it? Cool, room temp, best type of glass, etc., etc. So maybe Ger, if you want to, I suppose, maybe talk us into Barry Crcokett, and then maybe possibly address some of the points that Jason is bringing up.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Barry Crcokett, who is he? So Barry Crcokett is our Master Distiller Emeritus. He's the son of the former Master Distiller in Midleton and Irish Distillers, a fellow called Max Crcokett. And Barry is from Cork, and his mother is a lady called Nora Barry, and she's from a place called Dungorney, which is about 8 kilometers north of Midleton, and it's actually where we have our other maturation site as well. So where we age spirit until it nearly becomes whiskey, and then we bring it back down to the distillery. So that's you know, Barry is Cork. Even like Barry was, even though Barry's retired, he's very much part of Irish Distillers. I suppose you'd never kind of leave in that sense. And we, all of us, owe so much to Barry Crcokett, because if, as I said, if he hadn't continued making pot still whiskey when no one else was making it, we wouldn't have probably the success in Irish whiskey or the growth in Irish whiskey, but we wouldn't be able to enjoy any of the products that we're tasting tonight. So this style that was unfashionable when he took over from his father around 1984, from his father Max Crcokett, would have been probably not popular at all. And Barry is a very unassuming gentleman, but he's hugely knowledgeable and experienced. And he trained not under his father, actually. He trained under a gentleman called Clement Ryan. And Clement Ryan was a member of the Powers family. So he was, his mother was a Power, and the Powers obviously had the Johns Lane distillery. And Barry in 1974 worked hand in glove with Clement Ryan, who was our Irish Distillers production director from the beginning of Irish Distillers in 1966, and was obviously master distiller in Johns Lane prior to that. So Barry very much, again, without him, we wouldn't be able to enjoy any of these whiskies. An amazing man. He created Midleton Very Rare, so it made total sense when Barry was coming up to retirement that they would launch a whiskey that would be dedicated totally to the legacy of Barry Crcokett. And he's very much still alive, so he's not dead or anything, like, you know, touch wood. It's just simply a whiskey that is dedicated to him. And it's just a fantastic whiskey. In the main, it's essentially 16 to 18 years old, and then the whiskey is then put into virgin. A large proportion of the whiskey is put into virgin American oak barrels for another the guts of 4 years. You know, so varies. It can be, you know, some of it's 2 years, some of it's 4 years. Again, that adds more complexity because you have various age levels of that whiskey that's essentially the further matured. It's not a finish because it's in there for like 4 years. I wouldn't call that a finish. I would call that just a recasking and into a different cask type. It's all American oak, but there is that unique virgin American oak influence. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and it was carefully curated by Barry to, I suppose, reflect what he loved in whiskey.
Lovely. It's been a while actually since I've had a chance to try this. In regards to, I suppose, best way to drinking it, as Jason was asked, I suppose there's no necessarily wrong way to drink it, but I feel like if you want to get the most out of it, something like maybe a Glencairn or a Copita or a Two Glass are usually kind of good to get the aromas.
Absolutely. Anything with a wide base and a closed mouth. And the reason for that is the wide base allows you to, agitate the whiskey, to allow aromas and esters and congeners just to float out of the whiskey. But the closed mouth then will kind of hold them in there, so they don't just go straight out of the glass. And I got a lovely message for someone viewing tonight. I won't repeat it though. who's giving out about my nose. But basically, the thing about it, if you're drinking whiskey as well, you just really need a vessel that you can actually see the whiskey, because that's we drink with our eyes as well, so you need to be able to see it. And I noticed about this is the last whiskey had more of a copper hue to it. This is really, really, if I was to say liquid straw, golden sunshine in the glass, like it's really, and it's still got that viscosity, but it's not as viscous as maybe the Redbreast 21 was, clinging to the side of the glass. It's really sweet on the nose. So again, a glass that you can get your nose into, that you can look at. Like whiskey is going to be 40% by law minimum ABV. So you don't want to swirl it around like a wine, because there's a lot of alcohol here. 40% of this minimum is alcohol. In this case, 46%. So you just want to agitate it gently so you can look at it and just get an idea of what it's like. The second thing would just be to nose it. I taste whiskey neat first. If I'm tasting a new whiskey, I always try and taste it neat first. It doesn't necessarily, the reason for that is I don't know if this needs water or not, because I have tasted this before, but let's imagine I've never tasted this before. How do I know if it needs water? And absolutely not, I would put ice in it straight away. Nothing wrong with putting ice in your whiskey, or putting ice over, or whiskey over ice. But anything, when you reduce the temperature of something, you're talking about, what the right temperature to drink it is at. When I'm tasting whiskey for the first time, I'll try and taste it at the ambient temperature. So it, whatever the room is, if I've got a whiskey and it's been in the car for overnight at this time of the year, I'll try and bring it in a couple of hours before I'm going to taste it. So it kind of gets up to room temperature. And that being, it just means that if it's very cold, a lot of those flavors will be suppressed and you won't be able to enjoy them. So the first thing you do is have a little taste, have another little taste, find, maybe that's a little bit strong for my palate. Add a few drops of water, try it again. Oh, that's softened, opened it up a bit more, can appreciate things a little bit better. And just say, maybe it needs a little bit of water, and then just go, well, and then you get to a point where actually maybe this needs some ice. And certainly I love in the summertime, I love putting a cube of ice in certain whiskies, like Black Barrel, for example. I'd love, and a twist of orange, and I'd lash away on 2 fingers of that in a glass, and happy days. But it just depends on the occasion. There is really no right or wrong way, as Darren said, to drink it. But I'd certainly try and approach it in a way that you try it neat first for the first time, without adulteration, at room temperature, just so you can understand, actually, maybe I would like ice with this, or I would like water with this, sir. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid if you know whiskey to drink it the way you want to drink it. It's a personal choice, and we're all different. But certainly, it is kind of annoying when you see people coming in and going, "Give me this on the rocks," with a jug of water beside it, and you're kind of going, "Jesus, have you ever had that before?" No, I haven't. And
it's some whiskey with your water.
Yeah, it's just TV. People think, that's how you drink it. But again, if that's the way you want to drink your whiskey, and you like drinking it out of a coffee mug, or you like drinking it out of a tumbler, that's up to you. Don't, whatever glass you like. You know, I drink out of a flat bottom tumbler, quite a light one, not a heavy one. And that's just the glass I like to drink it out of. You know, but when I'm doing tastings, to a glass, absolutely supporting an Irish company. Glencairns are fantastic as well. They're really good glass. Yeah, like a Copita is what I would mainly use, because that's what they use in the distillery, and it's just from a consistency point of view. And if I've ever doing a tasting or organizing a tasting for someone like our master distiller Kevin O'Gorman, I would he would always not insist, but he'd much prefer to use a Copita, because that's what he's used to.
Lovely. So I suppose with that in mind now, I suppose if everybody hasn't had a chance to give this a taste and see what you think.
Yes, sorry, I was talking a lot of someone pointed out there in a personal message to me. So
name and shame,
so
Ger,
yeah, no, I'm not. I wouldn't do that to Mark down in Shelburne.
Yeah, very good. I suppose the first thing that I get off that is the virgin oak is very much apparent in that, without being overpowering.
Yeah, it's like it's toasted wood, toasted oak, but there's layers of vanilla and heightened sweetness to it. It's almost like you know, the zest that you get from when you're trying to just burst into a tangerine orange or something like that. You know, it's just wonderful. It's lively, but you know that virgin oak is actually going to add bitterness to it. You know, the toasted oak, the tannin, but totally counterbalanced by all those wood sugars, the sweetness of the spirit, and the lovely vanillin influence, that vanilla influence as well. And then a total collaboration between the wood spice and the pot still spice as well. Like, it's not a hugely difficult whiskey to understand. And again, you know, I say this all the time, this is like a breakfast whiskey. You know, you could drink this all day, every day, if you could afford it. You know, it's €250 bottle. It's a lot of money, but it's a real treat, and it's an ongoing expression, and it's really, really delicious, and is absolutely selling like hotcakes at the moment as well.
Yeah,
another one.
And only just came back into stock with us anyway. Obviously very popular over Christmas. But I think it's obviously, as there can be a little bit of an absence of Midleton on shelves for the most part. Having Barry Crockett there to kind of fly the Midleton flag is definitely great. I suppose it's David Byrne there. Would you need to be a whiskey ambassador to be able to drink for breakfast? No, David, don't let anybody tell you can't drink whiskey for breakfast.
I think we should all drink whiskey for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Sure, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. I suppose from my time, you know, with Jameson, kind of the way it was always described to me was that typically Midleton maybe shied away from using virgin oak, because with triple distilled spirit, it was a little bit more delicate, and new oak could very easily overpower the flavors of the spirit. Is that why it's only, I suppose, a component and a part of Barry Crockett rather than being full maturation?
I think I was more to the point, like, if you speak to Barry Crockett, if you look at Midleton Very Rare, it's only ex-American whiskey barrels. Barry was very much a fan of American oak. You know, he didn't, you know, even when you think of Midleton Very Rare back in 1984, like, he's the one who requested that it only be American oak. One was because the market at the time was actually, the idea was it was for travel retail and it was for American tourists. So they were thinking about the American consumer, but also Barry just preferred the character of American oak. And as a whiskey vessel for maturation, American oak barrels are incredibly stable. If you put a spirit into an American oak barrel of a particular type, of a particular, you know, say first fill that has held Tennessee whiskey or Kentucky bourbon for 2 to 4 years, you pretty much know what it's going to come out like after 10 years. It's very, very stable from that point of view. There's no like surprises at the end of it. Whereas European oak can be a lot more variable. One, in the past, the provenance of the European oak could have been, you know, a bit suspect from the point of view of the barrels could be, you know, you wouldn't have had that control of, as I was talking about, the sourcing the oak from the forests and knowing the sawmill, knowing where it was seasoned, knowing when it was shipped, how it was shipped, all that sort of stuff. Like, we know we work with every step of the way. You know, when a barrel is emptied in Jerez, that it's with us within 5 days, 6 days. You know, it's in Midleton getting filled with whiskey. And, you know, so that's in the past, that wasn't the case with many of the European oak barrels that we would have had in the earlier days, say the 70s or 80s. So from the point of view of European oak, Barry was a big fan of it because of its stability. And it's performed exactly as you would expect it to. And he said it's just a matter of taste. He liked it, you know. And that's why Midleton, the Midleton range is basically American oak is what it's all about. And I know Ger Garland is Irish oak, but it's an Irish oak finish. Like it's all American oak up to that point, really. And that's why there's some Midletons which are outliers, like the cask 989. Is it that one? Yeah, 989, the sherry cask. Midleton, that Celtic whiskey shop have as a single cask, and that's because they were, how shall I put it, before Midleton was as popular as it is now. You know, I know it's done recent enough, but the Loop in Dublin Airport and the Celtic whiskey shop were doing single casks, you know, well over a decade ago. It's before single casks were a thing, you know, if that makes sense. So when virgin American oak, as I said, the first expression that would have, I suppose, had the DNA of it would have been the Jameson Marconi, which was 25 years ago, maybe something like that. It's a long time ago. And then you have Jameson Gold. Then is the other one, and that was originally a travel retail exclusive for Asia, for Travel Retail Asia.
We've lost Ger for a little bit there. One second there, guys. We'll try and get Ger back. Looks like the connection just went a little bit fuzzy. Oh, I'm starting to hear you again, Ger.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know if it was just me, but I just lost you there for a second. So last thing, I don't know if anybody else hears that, was travel retail for Asia.
So yeah, originally, so Jameson Gold would have had virgin American oak. A third of it was fully matured in virgin American oak, and that would have been, I suppose, the first kind of permanent expression that had it. And now Midleton Barry Crcokett is really the pinnacle of it now, really, you know. It's it's just a wonderful example of that. And the reason for the virgin American oak was the experimentation that went on in the early 1970s around the maturation that I talked about. They experimented with everything. You've been to a warehouse, Darren. I don't know if everyone else here has been, but when you go to a modern maturation warehouse in the whiskey world, say Cavallan in Taiwan, or Chivas Brothers in Scotland, or you know, you go to one of the more the newer distilleries in say Kentucky, you find that maturation happens on a pallet. So you have a pallet, 6 barrels on it, stacked 7 high, and that form of maturation was actually pioneered in the early 1970s in Midleton. So that's something that Midleton is copied all over the world, because we were looking at more efficient ways of storing our barrels. And traditionally, they've been stored in dunnage warehousing, you know, warehouses where the barrels were stacked 3 on top of each other in a kind of a pyramid, along rows and rows and rows. And that way, you know, the reason that was because 3 men could lift the barrel. But then with forklifts, we were the first, I believe, the first business in Ireland to have forklifts. That's our claim to fame. And part of that was this palletization of maturation, because they did experiments to make sure it didn't affect the whiskey in a negative way. It just made it more efficient from a moving the stock around point of view, and also it didn't have any effect on the quality of the whiskey. So now that's something that's done all over the world. So I've totally gone off the point there, Darren.
No, you're all good. No, listen, Ger, we're here for your expertise, and I think for the most part, I'm sure a lot of people here have previous experience with these whiskeys, so it's always nice to get kind of the the inside baseball of whiskey. Jason there saying smells like honey. I think the longer you spend with this, more that sweetness kind of comes out. I know we mentioned earlier on that there was a slight bitterness from the virgin oak, but that kind of develops into the honeyed sweetness, a little bit more fruit. It's very much one that I think you could spend an hour with and get completely different notes as you go.
Yeah, like it is. I absolutely like the honeyed sweetness. It's there. It's really, you get again, you get those hinted citrus notes there, and it is the toasted oak, the vanilla character. It's sweet but not overly sweet. It's very drinkable and balanced. It's spicy. It's creamy. It's just wonderfully well put together whiskey, and as I said, it is 250 quid, but it's in a really nice packaging, and it's the quality of the whiskey inside is outstanding.
Absolutely. One last question on this before we move on to our next one. Would this be Barry's favorite whiskey because his name is on it, or does he have another one that has that?
Well, I could tell you yes, it is, but I can just tell you that if I've asked him, I did ask him what whiskey he drank. Like if he's at home watching the telly, finishing off his evening, what does he drink? And he told me Powers John's Lane.
Okay, right.
And that's another whiskey that he had a big influence over. And again, mainly American oak. There's less than 10%, kind of 4 or 5% is European oak, and that's again just for rounding, not to add influence to the whiskey. I think the bourbon component starts at 14 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 14 to 16 years of age, whereas it is a 12-year-old whiskey. And he told me that's, and I think Powers John's Lane, bang for buck, it is absolutely incredible whiskey. But you can see though there is a big kind of, you can see the difference though. Midleton, Barry Crcokett is just luxurious. That's the difference. John's Lane is a fantastic whiskey, and that's what he's told me. But that's what he likes. And again, everybody likes different stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose when a man has made almost every Irish whiskey that has won every award in the world, I'm sure he has to. It's tough trying to pick his favorites. I suppose speaking of Powers, I'm sure this is a great opportunity to move on to the Powers 16 single cask.
Yes, yeah. So if you grab your glass, I'm just going to pour mine.
Yeah. So this is obviously kind of our own exclusive here at Celtic Whiskey. It's I will say kind of it is coming towards the end of what we have in stock. So
again, single cask. So let me just explain what a single cask is for those of you who don't
looks like we might have lost Ger a little bit there again. That's grand. As long as everyone can still see me, I'm sure that's perfect. But yeah, as I was saying there, guys, coming towards the end of this, so if you do end up liking this evening, very limited number of them available with us for the next while. Ger, not sure if you can hear us there. It's not great reception down at that micro distillery. Can't get a good internet connection. Nope. Apologies for that, guys. Ger, we've lost for 1 second. We will get him back in. Just while Ger's gone, if anybody, I suppose, does have any questions that we can get ready for him when he comes back, any tasting notes, do feel free to throw them in there. If you want to ask me anything about whiskey, my personal life, anything like that, Ger, there we are. Sorry. So Ger, I can see you talking away there. I'll just ask you to unmute there.
Hello. Sorry,
yeah,
everyone.
There we go. Perfect.
My internet just decided to turn off and turn back on again for whatever reason. So I apologize.
You're all good. We were bad mouthing you while you were gone.
Good. Excellent. So yeah, look, a single cask is just a single cask of whiskey, and you can have two casks filled on the same day with exactly the same spirit, same type of barrel, and essentially placed in the same warehouse and left into this one here for 16 years minimum. And then you you get divergent. You get two whiskies that simply go off in different directions. They both at their heart say may have, you know, the core fundamentals the same, but the amazing uniqueness about a barrel of whiskey is that it's made from different trees, from different parts of a forest. So they all have a unique fingerprint and then add their own, and then they all mature differently. So I suppose when you're making an ongoing expression, say something like Powers John's Lane, the blender's expertise is to blend out characteristics that you don't want and blend in characteristics that you do want. But in the case of a single cask, it is what it is. It literally is, you know, disgorged or emptied. You know, it is filtered, and then you can and filtered, by what I mean filtered is they take the bits of charcoal basically out of it, you know, because they wouldn't be very nice in your whiskey. Although I guarantee you someone here would say they'd love that in their whiskey. But basically they take, you know, any kind of non-liquid bits out of the whiskey, and then they will bring it down to the selected ABV. And in this case, Darren, it's 46%. I'm right in saying that. And then it is bottled. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing the way it's, you know, done. And this used to be quite a special interest type of whiskey, but now you see single casks everywhere, and you see now even the United States and Canada, with the change in the regulations, they've done the first. I saw Corby have done their first single cask ever, and in the US. And in the US, many places now are doing single cask, which was unheard of. Whereas we've done them here for over 2 decades. We've been doing them for the likes of Celtic and other more specialist customers. So that's a single cask, and the reason people love them is that you really are getting a true sense of, you know, tasting something directly from a barrel. And this is the style that you find in Powers, which is a style called the light pot Midleton. And now it's light pot, but it's actually spirit forward. So like all the Powers range are made from this type of pot still called light pot Midleton. And in the early 1970s, when they were building Midleton Distillery, the idea is that they could make the 3 main types of spirit that you would have been, I suppose, common in the different founding companies. So you would have had, say, Midleton Mod Pot, which is what you find in Jameson or the Spot range, and you find some of that in, say, Redbreast. And then you also had Light Pot, which would have been the Powers John's Lane style. And if you taste old John's Lane whiskey from the 70s, from the 60s, you see that DNA crossover into the Midleton distilled whiskey. It's not exactly the same. It's a different distillery, obviously. But Barry Crcokett would have made sure that they would have kept that going. And then the other style we make is, in the main, it's the third style. It's called Trad Pot. And grain whiskey then is the 4th style, but that's the one we make. It's not in any of the whiskies bar the last one that we're going to try. It's in, you know, the likes of the Jameson, Jameson's, the Powers Go labels, the Jameson Bow Street that we're going to try in a minute. But this, getting back to this Powers single cask, this is one style of pot still distillate. 16 aged for 16 years in an ex-American whiskey barrel, and then bottled at 46%. And this is one of my favorite whiskeys. I did a tasting with this, as I was saying to Darren, for the Celtic whiskey tasting back in, it's about 6 years ago, maybe, I think. And this whiskey just really caught my imagination, you know. So if we have a little nose of it, so Powers, I'm sure you're all familiar with Powers, is it was a distillery in Dublin from John's Lane Distillery, which was a Irish Distillers site until 1984, when it was handed over to the Department of Public Works, and now it's National College of Art and Design. But the distillery is pretty much intact there. It's well worth a visit. And The style would have been a really fine grist, so really fine, basically they mill up the barley, malted, non-malted, and then they would have made a really fine grist. And this led to a very, I suppose, spicy type of distillate, but it's honeyed, it's spice. There's a little bit of red apple there, and it's like a spiced red apple, stewed red apple. That's Darren said it there earlier before we came on the call, and I was like, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's
like
a wonderful, rich nose, isn't it, Darren?
really rich nose, and I suppose, not to paint the whole Powers range with the brush, but as you said, they're kind of spirit forward, and I think that's so refreshing, because I think a lot of the emphasis on whiskey these days can be like finish it, wood influence, and you can kind of forget that like the spirit itself has so much character. And I suppose with Powers traditionally you'd be using maybe kind of older barrels, maybe on third use, fourth use sometimes, just to allow that spirit influence to shine through. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the case of this, the spirit itself is so powerful, excuse the huge pun, but basically it is again that balance between the sweetness of the spirit, but the distillate is actually very sweet as well. It's honeyed, which comes through. You get this kind of candied, spiced, rich, stewed fruitiness through it, and then lovely wood spice at the finish. The finish is really pleasurable and warm and long, and like, if you were stuck in a storm, this is maybe tonight. This is the one to drink. It's a great opportunity to try it. Darren, is there any of this left at all?
There's a little bit. So I was saying just while you were gone, we do have a little bit of it left. Like obviously it's a bottle that would have been, I think, bottled in 2017, 2018 or so. So there's a limited amount. It's currently, I think, at about 199 or so, 200.
I think it's great.
Say, yeah, bang for your buck. It's one of the best whiskies I've had recently anyway, and I'm not just saying that as a an employee of Celtic. It's, despite, I suppose, not maybe despite, but it's single barrel, it's one type of wood, it's one type of distillate, but I think this one has some of the most complex flavors that we've gotten out of any of the whiskies that we've had this evening.
It is amazing, isn't it, to think that it is coming from essentially one, it's one single barrel. It's all of those flavors that we're talking about have evolved over those 16 years with no influence from anything else. They've just been this interaction between the wood and wood compounds being battered by acids and alcohols, and all of those different chemicals, chemical evolution into all of these different flavors, all natural, all happening with nothing but time being the constant throughout them. I think it's just still really kind of crazy, amazing type idea, the whole thing.
Absolutely. And I suppose Powers, obviously, for I suppose a long time would have been maybe the domestic favorite in Ireland, and Jameson is getting huge. But I think for a lot of us, it still holds that kind of special place in our heart of being. It kind of flies the flag for, again, that particular style of pot still from a particular time in history. It's refreshing to see it not being trying to be overly flashy with the barrel maturations, or it's like here's really, really good whiskey in a simple type of barrel, and you just get a fantastic finished product. Yeah,
and again, it's we're not doing the hard selling, I promise you, because there really is. I have a bottle of this, so I'm not going to be buying another one, but it's well worth, if you can, picking one up, I think.
I should be getting another one myself tomorrow evening, I'm sure, because I've bring it down to Cork with me, back to Midleton, back to where it was born. We've got a few questions coming in there, Ger. So
yeah,
Keane
please fire away.
Asking, and this is more kind of a general question: are Midleton continually increasing production? Because obviously we've been talking a bit about demand maybe kind of outstripping some of the supplies. So is that I suppose something that you're counteracting with upping the production quantities, or how long do you think it'll take for all that to balance out?
Yeah, yes is the answer. And so part of the 2013 refurbishment or expansion of the distillery was to go from 4 pot stills in what we call now the Barry Crcokett still house, which confusingly we called the new still house when we built the garden still house. So, which was the old still house. So they changed the name to the Barry Crcokett still house. So that's the 1975 commissioned in 1976 still house, and that has two washes, which have just been replaced. A intermediate or faint still and a spirit still, as well as the columns were in there as well, which was, it was all in the one still house, which was amazing. You know, they were able to move stuff around and all that sort of crack. And then they built the garden still house, and you have two sets of 3 stills in the garden still house, and they have an operating capacity, the largest operating capacity of any stills in the world. So now we have 10 pot stills, and a very large grain column as well, which is split into 3 parts. So that was part of that expansion, but it has, you know, if the growth continues, you know, yes, definitely. I think in the future they will at the moment, there's no plans to expand anymore on the site, but I think in the future they'll certainly have to look at in some way satisfying the demand that's out there. The stills are, I don't know if you've Darren, you've probably seen them, but it's very hard to describe how massive they are, like compared to anything in Scotland. Or I've, you know, been to distilleries in Speyside, and you know, I it's terrible. I was like, oh, they're lovely, cute stills, and they're like, these are some of the biggest stills in Speyside, and I'd be like, oh, they're not that big, really, you know. But, you know, but they're really, really big, and that would have been the tradition in Ireland. We would have had quite large distilleries in comparison anywhere else, and the reason for that is distilling was legal here, so it was allowed to develop. And in 18, I'm going to get this wrong now, but I think it's about 1817 or thereabouts, but there was basically a review of, there was a cap on production of how much a distillery could produce. So it used to be loads of distilleries all producing X amount every year, because if you couldn't get it for, you know, one distillery sold out, you could get it from the next one. So there was room in the market for everyone. And then they lifted this cap on production, and basically all the not so great distilleries went out of business, and the bigger ones just got bigger. And Powers is one of those. That's a big expansion in the 1820s. And so the distilleries in Ireland tended to be urban. They tend to be on a large scale. So Belfast, Dublin, Cork, Galway, you know, Limerick, they all would have had big distilleries in pretty much in the centre of town, you know, which is kind of, you know, very different from Scotland, where they're rural, they're agricultural, if that makes sense. You know, they're up the end of valleys or on islands to keep away from the tax man, because they weren't strictly legal until the 1820s, whereas in Ireland they had been. But, you know, expansion in Midleton, we've just had a huge expansion. We've gone from, I think regularly a decade ago they were filling maybe 800 to 1,000 barrels a day, and now they're filling regularly over 2,000, sometimes 2,600 barrels a day, which is just an enormous amount of whiskey.
Yeah, I suppose the amount of manpower that has to go into that as well, like in terms of actually people filling them and staffing it, I'd say it's immense. Ross Keogh there just asking, probably missed it, what type of barrel? So it's ex-bourbon maturation for the Power 16 here. As you were saying, Ger, kind of Powers traditionally doesn't shy away from sherry casks, but would use them very, very sparingly.
Yes, yeah. They're not in gold label at all. There is a small proportion in 3 Swallow. Again, bookending the whiskey, kind of putting brackets on it, if you want to call it that. And the St. John's Lane even less. So they're the 3 expressions that are in the Powers range, you know, but gold label doesn't contain any, and gold label is incredibly good value. I mean, it is really, really high percentage pot still whiskey in it. You know, there's actually very little grain in it, really. Yeah, for me, I mean, gold label is just great value. But John's Lane, yeah, I think a lot of people will say maybe after a Redbreast or a John's Lane kind of would be people's favorite kind of whiskey.
Yeah, well, I suppose John's Lane won best pot still 12 and over at the Irish Whiskey Awards back in November.
Absolutely. I was there and accepted the award.
You were, you accepted many awards that night, Ger. Just, I suppose, one general question for you, just from Vincent there. Have you tried any of the old mash recipes that Bowman are currently experimenting with?
I haven't, no. And I was talking to Fionn on Thursday night. I did a tasting in the Palace Bar, and talking to him about it. So his thesis is coming on really nicely. He's working on his doctorate in with these historical mash bills, and it's part of this wonderful document that he's going to produce. Telling the story and the evolution of Irish whiskey over in the past, that may have been forgotten by a lot of us, even in our own industry. So I haven't, and I'm excited to see what they produce, and it's exciting that there is all of these experiments going on, and and this kind of look into the past for what our future is. And if I can blow the trumpet of Carol Quinn, our archivist in Midleton, that's exactly what we've been doing ourselves for the last, particularly with the pot stills that we produced since 2010. We've looked at the past about what we're going to produce in the future. So you look at something like Redbreast 10-year-old or Redbreast PX, or the spots like the Red Spot, or we've looked at historical stuff. Like even Midleton, if you look at Midleton, Barry Crcokett will tell you he's for fun, Barry used to go to the Port of Cork archives and basically look at what was being shipped into Cork in the early 19th century. And based on that, he came up with the thesis that most of the barrels used by Cork distilleries company, say places like Watercourse Distillery, they were using American oak barrels because that's what the firkins were being made of. So they've all that area of Cork, like they weren't going to get wood from somewhere else. It would have been, a similar type. So that's why another reason why he reinforces belief in or liking for American oak.
Martin Fades, there's just on the whiskey saying takes a while to unravel this one. There's a lot going on, and as we're saying, very complex. I don't know if anybody's tried it with a bit of water. So that's our third whiskey. We've got one more to go. If anybody has any final comments or thoughts on the Powers there, but as I said, it's coming towards the end. Obviously, Powers, fantastic brand. Without kind of saying too much, I know kind of we are looking at doing some more stuff with them in the future. But with this one, I'm kind of happy to have it around for a little while longer. But if you do want one, we have a few left. So final whiskey that we're going to be trying this evening is the Jameson Bow Street 18-year-old.
Yeah, absolutely. Bit of a virgin American oak here again. But also a really cool story with it in that the whiskey itself is so at the end of its life, if we want to call it that, it spends at least 6 months, 6 to 8 months in the only maturation warehouse in Dublin. So there is a maturation warehouse in the middle of the visitors experiencing Jameson's Bow Street distillery. And basically Bow Street is the street that essentially the original Jameson distillery was on, the distillery that stopped distilling the 5th of June 1970, and then all production was basically moved to Powers and then down to Midleton. It was, the idea of this was like they would be able to mature this whiskey in a maturation warehouse in Bow Street. Like in Dublin, there was whiskey matured right up to, as far as I know, 2001 in Dublin. So there's whiskey that was left over from, not so much, I would say by that time, the stuff from Jameson had been used up, so our bottling plant, since 1964, Powers moved their bottling operation and maturation out to Fox and Geese out, which was the countryside on the Nath Road. And they moved that from Drury Street, but Jameson continued, I suppose, vatting and working away until 1974 in Bow Street. But they had stock in under Connolly Station until 2001. There's bricked up kind of, I think there's garages and boxing rings in them now, but there was originally, used to be full of whiskey. And even the tunnel that goes from Connolly to to Houston. There was whiskey matured in there as well at one time. So basically, the idea was that there was always whiskey from the Jameson whiskies matured in Bow Street. So the idea was to just bring that back into the story of a whiskey. So this 18-year-old whiskey was launched in April, I think, of 2018. So it's about just under 4 years on the market. And it was launched at the same time as Jameson 18-year-old, which is a 46% whiskey. This one is at cask strength. So is it 55.3%? Am I right in saying that?
I think this current batch probably is. I know batch to batch there has been, I think, a slight variance. 55-ish will.
55-ish. So look, it's potent. It is. So the barrels are filled at 63.4% ABV. It's aged for a minimum of 18 years. And then, as I said, the final whiskey is made, and then, from bourbon and sherry barrels, and then basically it's spent 6 months in fresh bourbon barrels in Jameson's Bow Street Distillery. Minimum 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer. Whiskey's ready when it's ready, as they say. For me, I think the packaging is gorgeous. It's got this kind of wooden copper box. Every box has like a coin in the bottom of the box that you can use to go on the Jameson website and access like kind of material that's exclusive to the people buying the bottle. It's about €240, I think, a bottle, and it won best Irish blended whiskey at the Irish Whiskey Awards. Am I right in saying that?
I believe, I think blend with an age statement, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it took top honors on that. April, as I mentioned, 2018 was when I first started in Bow Street. So I literally, my first week on the job, I was drinking this brand new whiskey that hadn't been released yet.
And the name Jameson can, I've no problem saying Jameson is really, really popular. And a lot of people who drink Jameson don't even know they're drinking whiskey. It's a brand, but there, at its heart, there are some really good whiskeys. And the whiskey that's in this whiskey, there's 3 distillates in here. There's, there's that Midleton mod pot, which I talked about, which is at the heart of all the Jameson whiskies. That style, Bow Street style, that round, sweet, pot still distillate, that's at the heart of Jameson Original, or all of those. It's also got obviously a grain whiskey as well, and then you have a little bit of traditional pot still in here as well, which is really, really cool. So that's adding that kind of what I would call like complexity to it, I think. So why don't we have a little sip, everybody? It's just a great nose on it. Like it's there's a lot of wood here. Like virgin American oak is going to add a lot of wood. It's spicy, but this toffee type note always jumps out at me with this one.
Yeah, like I get a ton of vanilla on that one, and I suppose for a whiskey with as much sherry cask in it, like the fact that the vanilla component of it from the American oak is still as prevalent shows the balance.
Absolutely, there is balance, and there's absolute great balance there. But also, sherry barrels have a lot of vanillin in them. They have a lot of sugar in them as well, but it's just the tannin is so bitter that it tends to counteract that. But there is a lot of tannin in there, and also the sherry barrel is going to add that nutty type character to it. When you age a whiskey a long time in a sherry, like something like a sherry barrel, you get this compound furfural, which can manifest itself as a kind of a nuttiness, which is really cool. I had to Google it the first time I heard it. I was like, what the hell is that? But it can be like, it can add like leather and nuttiness. It's a really interesting type of flavor. It's really quite complex, isn't it, Darren? Like there's a lot going on.
There's a ton going on with it. Like I think the way I described it recently, just when I was finished off my bottle of it, was, it's going to sound awful, but do you remember Calippo, the ice lolly? But it has that kind of like, it has that tartness, it has that almost kind of like the sensation on the tongue, the sherbety almost note. You get the fruit sweetness, a little bit of citrusiness, just all around a fantastic whiskey.
So let's have a little sip first. And look, it's at cask strength, okay? So we're going to try it neat first. And you've already done 3 wonderful whiskeys, so it'll be no bother to any of it. But if you do want to add a drop of water to it, nothing wrong with that at all. Sláinte.
Not you guys.
Mm.
I think a few people were, myself included, were a bit ahead of you, Ger. So Whiskey Cabin in Tralee loves it, and Ross Kill thinks very drinkable for the strength. Absolutely. Like, I think the sign of a good cask strength is when you don't necessarily realize that it's cask strength.
It doesn't. And even after those three whiskies, it's funny, I have the Barry Crockett here, a little bit of it in the glass. It's amazing, that toasted oak, because they're both got virgin oak.
Mm-hmm.
You can get a little bit of it, but the Barry Crockett is just almost all wood now. On my nose, even though it was lovely, as someone had mentioned, honeyed vanilla, all that. And because this is a cask strength, it's a lot more concentrated from a flavor point of view, even though it is really smooth and mellow and easy to drink, but it is more concentrated in flavor, and it's amazing how it now overshadows the Barry Crockett, even though it has the commonality of the virgin oak. And the other thing, probably because the virgin oak is like 6 to 8 months as opposed to a couple of years, it's probably carrying a lot more of that sweetness and vanilla that you're getting.
Jason there thinks that it's the best tonight so far, and lots of vanilla. The way I would describe this to anyone who kind of is wondering the difference between this and the standard Jameson 18, it's like this is the espresso version of Jameson 18. It's same juice, less water, more flavor, more complex.
That's a great description. Really
yeah.
cool.
That's my go-to whenever I need to describe anything strong whiskey wise. It's like the espresso version. Like, as for me, I suppose it has a special place in my heart because I said it was there when I first started with Jameson.
Yes.
It's I think it's out of stock with us at the moment, but it should be coming back into stock relatively soon. I believe possibly there's some change in the packaging a little bit, and then it'll be available to us again. Yeah,
they're just, again, 4 years down the road, they're just upgrading it a little bit. And the other thing is as well is that it's the last, what would you call it, the last 2 years have been so disruptive for all of us. This is actually, I think, meant to be done 12 months ago, but yourself, everything has been delayed. But it is, if you get your hands on it, it's a great whiskey, and it's €240 as far as I know. But they do, Celtic will get regular Celtic whiskyshop.com, or go into, is people allowed back into the shop, Darren?
People have been in the shop with us for the past, I don't think there was ever actually, other than the initial lockdowns, the shop has remained fully open. So that's been fairly handy. I think we are due to start some in-store tasting soon enough.
I was just going to ask, because that was the great thing about, if you're in town, you could pop in, try. There was always a couple of bottles of new and exciting stuff, or old stuff, in a good way.
Or old, new and exciting stuff.
Exactly, old, new and exciting stuff. So that's something that hasn't been allowed, crazy enough, and so that's really good to hear. So I look forward to popping in and seeing what's happening.
Absolutely, we're looking forward to having everyone back. I mean, the virtual tastings, I think we'll keep up with, because they're a lot of fun. They're handy to do. I think it's great for people to be able to kind of do a taste in the comfort of their own home. But if anybody is kind of passing through town and wants to drop in, usually we'll going forward in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have something open. In terms of this one, the Jameson 18, as we mentioned, kind of Jameson's such a popular brand, but I suppose it has so many, devotees, for lack of a better word. I suppose it is the most commercially available pinnacle of the range, but obviously there was a slight variant of the Bow Street 18 that did get around to a lucky few people earlier on in the year, and that was the 21, which was essentially kind of the evolution of the 18. Without kind of going too deep down that rabbit hole, maybe talk a little bit about that one.
Oh, well, what to say about it?
Kind of happened by accident, essentially, didn't it?
I suppose it did in one way, because, as you said, because of the 18-year-old, they were able to have the stock essentially to see what could happen with the 21-year-old. I mean, it's part of a series of, whiskies that are essentially trying to, in the absence of, a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, or, it's just trying to show that Jameson, there are amazing whiskies in the Jameson range, and there's no difference than the whiskey that you find in, say, the 21-year-old than you'd find in Jameson Original, just to show you the quality is there. Because people often think that Jameson Original is some other thing. It's exactly distilled in the same stills, put into the same type of casks, and there's nothing in any way different than the way that the Jameson Bow Street 18-year-old or the 21 is produced. And the idea behind it was literally just to show people, look at the quality of this stuff. It is as good as the 21-year-old is because it's the same whiskey ultimately. So that was the purpose of it, to try and elevate Jameson and say, lads, don't be thinking that it's not as good a quality as Redbreast or Midleton. They're made in the same distillery, but it's amazing how different they are. From little tweaks in the production process, you can get almost an endless different array of whiskies coming out of the same distillery. So Jameson on its name, Jameson 21-year-old, the purpose of it was to highlight the quality and the heritage of Jameson. So I suppose that was the idea behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had a chance to sample it, and it's the evolution of the 18, the Buster 18 up to the Jameson 21. If anybody hasn't had a chance and does manage to come across a bottle, I would jump on it, definitely. So before we kind of start wrapping up, we're approaching the hour and a half mark now. We'll suppose any final thoughts that you have on maybe what your favorite was of all the whiskeys, or the same final questions that you have for Ger, myself. I think, depending on stock, if anybody does have any more of these that they do want to try, we've just launched something recently called Rams Delivered, where we can actually send you out, just like you've received this evening, whiskeys by the measure. So if there was anything else you want to try, maybe if the bottle isn't available, if there's an open bottle down in our bar in Killarney, we want you to measure, so we'll be able to get it out to you that way. Few questions coming in there, or comments. So Jason, who said best of the night. Martin Fay, great selection tonight, gents, nicely curated. Thank you very much, Martin. Vincent, Redbreast still my favorite, but amazing range of distinct tastes. Great selection. Many thanks. No problem at all, Vincent. Ger, this for yourself. Unbelievable knowledge of all. Fair play. Thanks for a great night from Whiskey Cabin Tralee.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And do you find, kind of, Ger, that obviously, as I said, you're many years into this job, is it still kind of presenting itself kind of new challenges, new opportunities, or has it kind of mellowed out?
It has. Well, like, I learned everything I know, as Seamus Lowry would say, from Bushmans. I learned everything from him. But basically, when I first kind of saw Seamus Lowry doing what he was doing and talking about whiskey, like, when we think about just where Irish whiskey has come from, in that time, you can really see. You can see I'm just amazed, in particular the last 2 years, Darren, at the growth of the premium end of the market. I thought it had got to a point that, like, it couldn't grow anymore in my own head, but it's because more and more people are coming in at Redbreast. They're coming in at that kind of level of whiskey. They're not coming in as they were before, starting off maybe drinking Jameson ginger and lime, and then moving into maybe a black barrel, and then, like, they're literally coming in at Redbreast and going up, which is just incredible. And the people, people are drinking it. There's just so much new stuff coming down the line. That's the other thing. We have so many products on the market at the moment, and we've growth in every market in the world, and it's really, really exciting. I don't know what to say. Like, what I've seen, a big trend that I saw over COVID, particularly going to Whiskey Live in Paris, which was very lucky to go to in October, but was that a lot of the distilleries in the likes of Scotland or the US and Canada have they actually, during the lockdown and all that, they started looking back into themselves and saying, what made us actually famous? What made us popular? Let's go and do that again. So they were kind of going back to their roots and what they were famous for. And I like to think in Midleton, that's something we've been doing for a long time. And in Irish Distillers, I should say, not in the Midleton, but in Redbreast, for example, all of the innovation that we're looking at is coming from, a real place from our past. And that's I suppose, how it goes. That's what I see really happening at the moment in my mind.
Lovely stuff. I suppose the future is bright. It's been obviously a challenging 2 years, but I think the fact that the whole industry itself has been able to, like, in kind of in many ways thrive. I know for us, being open through everything, obviously there's been lulls, but like people haven't lost their appetite. If anything, kind of the appetite for whiskey, and especially kind of premium whiskey, has definitely grown from the retail perspective anyway. Whether it's kind of people buying premiums for collection purposes or for gifts. It's definitely kind of heartening to see. Few kind of last questions there, guys, before we finish up. So Killian saying, really nice drop and doesn't need water for the Jameson 18. As we said, kind of a sign of a good cask strength that it doesn't necessarily need that. To Ian, any more tastings coming up? Nothing officially announced yet, with kind of in-store tastings possibly on their way back. We're kind of focusing on that for the immediate future. Yeah. But I know myself and the whiskey team have been kind of discussing potential new tastings. So, without giving too much away, there's possibly options for maybe a complete mystery tasting where it's, 4 whiskeys for under 100. You don't know what they are. It's just kind of selections from myself and the guys, and we kind of just do a head-to-head on the night, something along those lines. I know kind of, Ger, you've been a kind of a frequent collaborator, you and the guys at IDL, so I'm sure we probably will see you at some stage again for another tasting. Yeah,
that'd be great. I it's just really enjoyable from the point of view of being able to revisit whiskies that maybe I haven't tried in a while either. Like I don't normally get to try, like that Palace Bar 16-year-old Powers single cask, and even the Barry Crcokett. It's not something I drink every day, even though I said I'd like to, and they're just really just fab whiskies.
Lovely. Well, I suppose there seems to be consensus from the rest of the kind of comments here. Just it's not often you get to try 4 incredibly special whiskies side by side. So look, guys, we're gonna wrap it up there. If you enjoy this evening, be sure to kind of drop into the shop and if you need anything, we're always here to help. And Ger, we will hopefully see you, if not before Whiskey Live, then at Whiskey Live itself. The Callback, Killian, good man, the Callback tasting at 9th of March. So the Midleton Callback selection.
That's me too.
That's you too. Lovely. I don't think it'll be myself. You probably get one of my colleagues, but I know kind of everyone in the shop anyway is excited for that one.
It's amazing. Again, whiskies that are all essentially the same base whiskey, all put into barrels from the same forest. Like, they should all taste the same.
Yeah.
But they don't. As in, you can really see the differences, which is really cool. And it's like going on that journey and figuring out why they taste different, and trying to figure it out. It's very interesting.
It's nice when you kind of turn whiskey into like a little detective game. It's like, let's figure out why this is different. So, guys, look, we will leave it at that. Thank you so much. Be sure to join us again for our next virtual tastings and our in-person ones. And I hope everyone stays safe. Obviously, kind of possible storm disruptions coming up. So stay safe, stay in with a glass of whiskey, and enjoy.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for.
And Ger, thank you so much to you as well.
Pleasure.